we are not doing architecture, just actually we pretend to do architecture. That's the main joy for us, because we never built something real. You know, that's the fun part of it. What happens when you want to do a movie is you start to have a story or something like a story, and so you start to think about what you want to tell about, what is within the story, what is about the story, and the moment you do that, the story needs a place, you know, to happen. And that is actually the same process like you can say in the theater. In the theater you have the stage, and in a film you probably would not have a stage unless the stage is part of the story. So you have to create the whole world for the story, and it doesn't really matter what it is. It doesn't matter if it's like a science fiction fantasy thing and you have to imagine or invent an entire new world which doesn't exist, or if you play just in your own apartment in the city you know well, or something, whatever. It doesn't matter. The system is always the same. You have to make up the rules and to set up the world for the story. So the world becomes the stage, so to say, for the story. That's what you have to do as a production designer. What I'm going to show you today is a very, for our circumstances, a very unusual project, because we were asked to build an entire, not only an entire street, but actually more than a street. What you can already see here in this little mock-up model, it's almost like a block of streets. And of course, the main question was at the time, how can we recreate Berlin in the late 20s, and how and where could we possibly shoot that? Because Berlin, almost 100 years later now, obviously has changed entirely. Studio Babelsberg, which is the big studio outside in Berlin here, which used to be the UFA and then the DEFA, so that's like the home of movie making, one of the oldest studios in the world, really, where film was invented. And they desperately wanted to create or build a new backlot street. This is now the finished floor plan of the whole street, what we call the Neue Berliner Strasse. And here we can already see it's almost the same. I think we flipped the streets from left to right, but it didn't make any difference. Is that we had like two longer streets and two shorter ones. This is the connecting one. So in this case, we have the richer part of Berlin on this side, developing around the corner in what we call Kreuzberg, which is like the bourgeois in between part of Berlin, and then getting poorer and poorer, and had the very modern shopping and nightlife street over here. And the whole thing was connected through a system of courtyards, which is very typical for Berlin architecture. So, and then we started to design the individual facades, which was kind of funny, because we were starting to design in the very beginning with 2 or 3 people on the computer. And after, I think, 1 or 2 days, when we started to look at what happened, it was so extremely boring and uninspiring, is that we switched them off and went back to pen and paper, really. Because you can see that probably a little bit here, is because what we did on this kind of facades from turn of the century is, I mean, you know, the structure of the facade is rather boring, and in this case here almost the same all the time. So the design is more in the dimension and in the architectural details. And for us to do this on computer didn't make sense, because here you can pretend to design, because you can just sketch it up a little, and that was more than good enough for us in the beginning, and much easier to do than with the computer. What we started to do is that we went down alongside the street, and every facade is getting less and less ornamented. So you can see that even on this image already, that, you know, that they're getting easier and less elaborate. as it goes on. This is the Mokka FD is the only really specific design we did for a kind of a big nightclub, which plays a big part in the series. And what's interesting for us was looking at all this very really modern stuff is really how fantastically modern the modernist architecture in Berlin at this time was. There are buildings in which you still would think they are super modern, and they are from really 25 or something. And it's an amazing thing. So here, this is the street on the other side, which is the poorer street, and even here you can see how the buildings, how the facades getting more and more poor and slim and kind of run down, also in terms of the colors. What's happening is when you're standing on the one side of the street and look down, because of this dissolve of the facades from rich to poorer, is that you still can look down the street and have the idea of saying, okay, now we are in a better neighborhood. And the moment you turn around the corner, you have the same sensation. Looking backwards, you have the same sensation. At the same time, you still can have the transition from rich to poor. Otherwise, we could never kind of achieve the whole city in this little 4 streets. This now was like the final model, very different to the model before, because this is all like the design facades put together as they were supposed to be, or supposed to look like afterwards. So this was much more elaborate and kind of fun. Again, we were keeping it pretty simple, as you can see. It's still more or less black and white copies of the drawings put on cardboard and put together, which is actually good enough. And of course, again, here you can see what is so different, because the backside of the model is obviously not like a mistake, because that's all what we build. I mean, we only build facades. So a building in our case is, from the facade you see is like 50 centimeters, and that's it. And everything else is scaffolding behind it, right? It's like a very shallow skin. It's nothing behind it, never. The moment you need somebody to stand behind a window or come outside a door or something, you start building this individually. So on a backlot street like this, you can see that also later on the photographs. It's just a hollow kind of body. There's nothing really behind it. Imagine for a series like Babylon Berlin, for the first 16 episodes, I think we would have about 40 different locations, let's say, in Berlin. So because the idea for the series was that every image which plays or every scene which plays in Berlin, other than on some scenes on Alexanderplatz and in front of like specific buildings of some characters, but every general image of taking place in Berlin was shot in the backlot. We never mix up with real locations in the city. So therefore, our tiny 4 streets had to represent over 40 different locations supposed to be entirely somewhere else. So how would you do that? That's like you only have 4 street corners, and you can have only like 8 perspectives in this case. How would you do that? So that's why the digital editions came into place. And from our side, changing shops and changing pubs and changing whatever in the foreground, and everything else was really something we needed to discuss with director camera to say, how can we use this at night and this at day, and this is out of focus, and this is with rain, and this is with fog, and this is out of whatever. So that every moment really started to look very different, and it kind of worked. And again, then changing the background again, so that you would never have automatically the same images in the depth, and change the whole thing. And that's how it works. And that's how that's almost the only possible way to do a complex period movie nowadays in a city like, or representing like Berlin.